In film school, they make a big fuss about visual storytelling. They say, oh, we love a good line of dialogue, but it's not about the dialogue. It's about the camera.
I think you really need to know how ideas and emotions are expressed through a visual form.
It's a visual medium, man. Enough with this My Dinner with Andre. I mean, has this dude even heard of Mise en Son?
The real making of the filmmakers when they look to that viewfinder.
Put some information up in the frame, bitch!
This is what it looks like when you do that. After a decade of live-action superhero movie after superhero movie and animation ruled by Pixar's Iron Fist, Spiderverse was an absolute miracle, a gift. Every shot in this movie is like, yeah, boy! Every frame, it's clear as day what the action and emotion is. Every single movement tells you about the character's personality. Every character performance has real depth. Every single leaf, you know deep down it's a masterpiece of visual storytelling from top to bottom. There's just so much to look at. You can watch the whole film just thinking about composition. What's in the frame? Better yet, what's not in the frame? What can you say using elements in the foreground? The background? How can you make your villain really intimidating? He's the whole frame. I will not use the French word, but everything is where it needs to be in relation to the camera. Therefore, you could also just think about shot size.
You gotta say I love you back.
Dad, are you serious?
I wanna hear it.
You wanna hear me
I
say
love
it?
you, Dad.
You're dropping me off at school?
I love you, Dad.
Look at this place.
Dad, I love you.
Dad, I love you.
That's a copy. Tie your shoes.
If you want, you can even get as specific as the vertical height of the camera. The height can tell you about the scene. Peter's glitching out, he's kind of sorry looking, we look down on him. Suddenly here, the camera is pointed straight at the ground, but the eye levels are even slightly looking up. Same idea here.
I killed Spider-Man. Why did I just see two more? There's three, actually. No, this is good. This is very, very good. So you get what you want? The collider works. All we have to do is kill a couple of spiders. And the collider will bring your family back. As many families as you want.
Camera height is hard to unsee if you're looking for it. Everything becomes the pathetic meme. And although it's an animated film, the camera movement has physical weight, as if they did it for real. More importantly, the camera only moves to emphasize some emotion.
No, this is it.
You can watch the whole film just thinking about color. What makes this villain so legible, and how do you use the environment to foreshadow his identity? He's purple. How do you make it feel like he's everywhere when you're being chased by him? It's all purple. Also crucial is this crazy sound that they associate with him. That's a great sound. In this scene, they even try to trick you into thinking it's him by playing the sound really quietly.
I can't do this.
But this video is not about sound. It also works because they gave him a distinct silhouette. I think everyone already knows how good a job they did integrating comic book form with traditional cinematography. Comic books have no lens, so the depth of field is not lens blur, but a CMYK offset that comes from printing. But they are constantly making choices about the lens.
I'm doing this in slow motion, or does it just feel that?
Wanda, no G.
There's no shutter speed, so there's no motion blur. They find different ways to exaggerate movement. And it's mostly not your typical squash and stretch. Famously, they even varied the frame rates depending on the needs of the scene. All of these unusual animation choices are there to tell you about both the action in front of you and also the reference material, whether it's comics or anything else.
1933, and I'm a private eye.
The 3D lighting is f***ing rendering in halftones. The shadows are made of hatching. It's sort of easy not to notice it's like this all the time, because the film is just lit like world-class cinematography. They're always looking for a way to reinforce story with lighting. This is probably the clearest example. After Miles gets chased by the scary purple guy, he comes inside with the cold blue shadows from outside and the warm light from his parents.
Put your hands up, Miles.
Oh, he's safe here. Light is something you respond to at a very basic level, like a moth. So every shot on its own is top shelf, but a lot of the film's charm comes from the effect of repetition. They like to do this matching shots thing. They can be right next to each other, almost right next to each other, or they can be at opposite ends of the film. What we learn from the so-called Kuleshov effect and early Soviet editing theory is that when images function in pairs, they always produce some excessive third thing. You get something new about the character, maybe a clear sense of progression, or even just a laugh.
Can't be that easy.
Probably the best example is this shot. It's Miles' reflection, and he's still looking up to Spider-Man. The eye level doesn't match. Later, he comes back, we get the same shot, the camera moves, the eye levels do match, and we know he's ready to be Spider-Man. And by introducing every Spider guy the exact same way with this comic thing, eventually they can do this without saying anything, and you know exactly what it means. This is the movie, maybe, that most successfully acknowledges the jumbled, overabundant, massive continuum of media production we live in. If I just move my thumb, I will continue to see new pictures forever. YouTube will guess that I want to watch ProZD eat 27 different Oreos, and that is correct. If you showed Twitter to a medieval serf, they would probably die.
Message for you, son.
This mess is the jumping off point of Spider-Verse's aesthetic. You might call it postmodernism or the cultural logic of late capitalism. This is a film that says, our theme of multiple universes allows us to include even memes in an authentic way. They said the world has so much Spider-Man content, the Spider-Mans can all hang out. Miles Morales' world has Peter Parker in it. He is a totally unique protagonist who already knows exactly what it means to be Spider-Man, and that makes it more challenging to actually do it. How do you introduce a protagonist in a film about identity and self-expression? Have him try a bunch of ways to write his name. What does it look like when Spider-Man is a universal symbol, ideal of justice, and a literal baby child has to live up to that? So much of the imagery is based on this idea. It's not just putting on Spider-Man's mask, it's doing it in the mirror. The gaze behind the mask asks itself what exactly is behind the mask. The fastest way to have an identity crisis is to put on someone else's face. For most of the movie, Miles is in this store-bought costume. Fabric's cheap, there's a little tie. Most importantly, you can see his eyes. How much more real can you get portraying a kid trying to be Spider-Man?
Can I return it if it doesn't fit?
It always fits. Eventually.
If you want, this works as more than just a joke. It really does fit eventually. Miles has 3 complex paternal figures in this movie. They all ultimately encourage him, including his dad, who hates Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
He says to Miles, "You'll be great whatever you do," which technically includes being Spider-Man. And that's when he's finally ready. In this completely hype sequence, so-called leap of faith or the what's up danger sequence, he really doesn't know at the moment of the jump how exactly he's gonna follow up or whether he's gonna be okay. This is probably the most famous shot in the film, not only because it's amazing and upside down, but because it signals the most important character transformation. Storyboards are like the common unit of a film in a comic book. You only get a film right like this by building on a lot of different visual development, especially since editing animation like this isn't like live action. It's not post-production, it is production and also pre-production. Every interview you read, animators say it was about collaboration, but also bringing their individual personalities to the table.
Oh, it's just like in the movie.
And the weird thing is, by presenting the Spider-Man story as something everyone already knows, they gave us something we never saw before. The Spider-Man story is fundamentally about the failure to save someone.
For me, it was my Uncle Ben.
It was my Uncle Benjamin.
It was my father.
For me, it was my best friend.
Miles even gets double the origin story.
Just keep going.
Interestingly, Kingpin is also about the failure to save someone, Claire Saffitz and a small boy. The difference is that he tries to undo the loss, reverse the trauma. So actually this shot where he encompasses the whole frame might even express this obsession with totality, the desire to be whole or complete again. And while we're talking about visual storytelling, I feel like I have to come up with something about Miles' invisibility. There's already a lot going on with visibility as a political category, as in the visibility or representation of black and brown characters. It's important that the black and Puerto Rican Miles Morales is seen front and center as the focal point of the movie, but on top of that, we live in a surveillance state and so on. It can be useful not to be seen, especially if you're in a vulnerable group. It's also a really emotional superpower at first. You understand and also feel Miles' emotions via the invisibility. What all of that eventually adds up to is Miles as a young man of color who is in charge of the conditions of his visibility. That is a beautiful idea, because such a thing is extremely difficult, if even possible, in the real world. There are purists who say all a film should do is take us visually through one character's emotional journey.
Glide, you beautiful boy. Glide, you beautiful boy.
This film is filled with technical brilliance and also many small gifts.
Purple.
No.
Blue.
This film discovered new things about both cinematography and comic book form by putting them in serious dialogue. It found a unique aesthetic that was a direct result of capitalist production and at the same time only possible by intentionally deviating from the profitable animation of the time. More than that, the aesthetics of Spider-Man, of Glitch, and of multiple universes is actually visual storytelling about, like, 2018 itself, of our world as expressed by media of our time. And that one they did by accident. So thank you and congratulations to the only film ever made. Amazing job to the million people who worked on it. May the sequel be even more amazing. I wish we had gotten Spider-Man Road Trip movie, and I love you.
I love you.
Unless I stuck by ya, you're a sunflower. I think your love would be too much, or you'd be left in the dust. Unless I stuck by ya, you're the sunflower. You're the sunflower.